Hey, I think that's maybe my cue to start. Um, Hi, everybody. So it's a little unclear to me how many people are here or who I'm speaking to, but I've got the Discord open, and I think it's readings even. So I hope that if you have any questions or comments, you can type that in that Discord room. Um, and specifically, normally I would give people a couple options. So I'm not sure if I can do that here. I'm Marianne Mohanraj, and I could either read from a short story that is on my website, which would mean that you'd get to read the end of the story when my time runs out and finish it. Or I could read you from the brand new novel in progress that I'm sending off to my agent on Monday, um, in which case I don't know when or if it will be published. So I don't know when you'd get to hear the rest of it. Oh, Readings Odd. I take that back. I should be in Readings Odd. Okay, let me duck over there. Um, and uh, and I'm glancing at Readings Odd just now in case if anyone is there who wants to express a preference for either the short story or the novel. Now is your chance. And if not, I'll roll the dice, I guess. Lawrence is typing. Hello, Lawrence. Oh, dice are fine, Deirdre. so, um, and the readings room is shared on Twitch. Oh, interesting. Okay, so there may be many more people seeing it, well, but they don't get to chime in and vote. Read whichever you're more excited about. Okay, well, then I'll read the novel to you guys. I'm excited in the sense that it is brand new and terrifying. So this is part of my Jump Space universe, and it is I'm trying to think if there's anything else you really need to know. I don't think so. What has been published in this universe so far is a novella, The Stars Change, and 5 or 6 stories, which are linked from my website that you can read online. So here we go. It starts with a tiny prologue. I kind of hate prologues, and yet, I don't know, the story I think needed one. So Maya was 5, young enough that it was still hard to breathe Kriti's air, especially when there were lots of humans crowded together, sweaty dhotis and saris holding the stink of the day's work, algae scent clinging to each thread. Crowding together didn't really mean less air, her Da had told her many times. Kriti's sky was wide above them. Her people weren't cramped in, breathing the same recycled air like the people in the domes. But it felt like it was harder to breathe when there were hundreds of their folks squeezing up against each other in the dusty community courtyard, all gathered to hear her father speak. Maya had been listening to her dog give speeches her whole life, rousing their people to fight for each other, for better wages and work conditions. Maya loved hearing his thunderous phrases rolling through the air and the crowd chanting back, "Who does the work? We do the work. Clap your hands, stomp your feet. Without our labor, no one eats." But it was lonely, too, losing her Da to the crowd. Maya had lost her Amma so long ago. After all, it was just the two of them. No, that wasn't actually true. Auntie Sila's gentle hands rested on her shoulders, holding her safe. And now her aunt's hands moved to Maya's sides. Strong arms lifted her up. Auntie Sila settled her on Omar Jamie's broad shoulders. Now Maya had the best view in the crowd. Only the rippled tin roofs were higher. While the roofs, the red-brown crowns of the Pulmeki trees, and a lone Castrani scavenger circling far above. Maya craned her neck to see all around, leaning out perilously, knowing Omar Jamie would keep his hands locked safely on her legs. Sorry about the beeping there. I don't think I can turn that off. Oh, maybe I can. Okay, hang on. Okay, good. That shouldn't happen again. The settlement's homes surrounded them. Ugh, or maybe it will. That's Discord beeping at me. Okay, guys, you can hear all that beeping, right? Well, maybe it'll stop. The settlement's homes surrounded them. Algae plants rose silver bulbous to the south, and everywhere Maya looked, going on into forever, grew fields and fields and fields of green gold plants, doing the most important work on the planet, making air. Maya imagined that she could even see the capital, far off in the distance, a glint of force field dome holding in the oxygen-rich air the city people needed. They weren't as tough as she was. Her father had promised to take Maya there soon as she mastered her bicycle, so she could see the aliens in the streets coming to the great university. Someday she'd go to university too. Maya's gaze circled back, like a planet orbiting its star, to her Da on his platform. He'd been raised just high enough so all their people could see him, a much repaired microphone cradled in his broad hands. He'd been working on it late last night, swearing as the sparks singed his fingers, but he'd gotten it going again. He always did. Her father smiled at her then, a cheerful grin just for her, his special girl. Brian McCarthy was her Da, even if he was also Zamindar for the whole community. And Auntie Sila was hers too, and Omar Jamie, and our cousin Nuala, and so many more. A sea of faces, brown and tan, pale and ruddy, bobbing all around her, smiling and chanting and cheering for her father, the one who fought for them, took care of them. Her Da always said Maya should eat her vegetables, grow up big and strong, study hard. Someday she could fight for her people too. Maya wouldn't disappoint him. Part 1, Chapter 1, 20 years later. The 2-hour bicycle ride from her Toluca through the fields was routine, but Maya ran into a problem at the entrance to the city's dome. She'd gotten off her bike, gotten in the line for entry. All of that was routine. But when she made it up to the guards, "Show us your ID. What's your business in Kaveri?" "I'm a student at the med school." Maya did this trip weekly. The guards should know her by now, or they would if they paid any attention to the flow of people in and out of the capital. The taller guard cast a disparaging look at the state of her sari. Maya would like to see that woman keeping a sari clean through a dusty bike ride. Maybe some of her frustration showed on her face because the guards started asking her questions. "How old were you when you first came to Kriti?" "I was born here." "When did your parents come to Kriti?" "They were born here too, and her grandparents." "What's your home Toluca?" 7A. "It's unusual to have someone from your Toluca attending the university. How long have you been studying there?" 3 years of med school, with 2 years of university before that." They looked dubious, but Maya had skipped a few grades. If she had to, she could pull out the records and prove it. "It's almost curfew. You know you won't be allowed to bicycle in the city after it starts." "I know. I'll walk my bike to class." Only her student pass allowed her to be out after curfew at all. The questions went on, as if they thought they could catch her in some lie that proved she came from off-world. Since last year's bombing of the Warren, security had been tightened across the planet. The planetary capital, Kaveri, and the 2 domed towns were on heightened alert, but Maya had never gone through this before. The guards searched her bag and clothes, rough hands patting her down, neck to ankles, right there for all to see. They even made her undo her braid, as if she might be hiding explosives in her hair. Maya bit her tongue, despite the pounding irritation in her chest. If she resisted or complained, they would only keep her longer. When they finally released her, Maya practically flew through the cobble streets, which were now almost empty. Just a few people hurrying home before curfew. And only humans. Every week it seemed like she saw fewer aliens in Kaveri's streets. The capital housed the University of All Worlds, such a grandiose vision the founders had had. It all seemed to be slipping away now. Stars were emerging, faintly visible through the shimmering screen of the capital city's dome. Still, no sign of the battles far beyond, the great ships and other solar systems contending for vast tracts of space. The skies above Kriti were still quiet enough that one might put aside the prospect of war, at least for long enough to finish one's studies. Maya was out of breath by the time she locked her bike to its rack, rearranged her sari skirts, and ran up the dozen marble steps that mark the main med school building. Normally, she felt a little thrill walking into the great hall, with its beautiful arched windows and stained glass panels depicting healers working across the universe, a temple of medicine. But today she was terribly late. When Maya walked in, Professor McClaw cast a reproving glance at her before turning back to his screen, scaly brow furrowed. Shamed heat flushed her face. He was her favorite professor and she was one of his star students. Not today, though. He'd clearly already completed the Tahitian material and was moving on to the second segment of the class. Now, your final exam is just a few weeks away, and I'd like you to pay special attention to the requirements of silicone-based life forms. We may never encounter a sentient silicone-based species, but historical records on Mardin indicate that one may have existed there before the nuclear event. Andeli Surayenye had saved her a seat, and as she slid into it, he sent her his lecture notes over the class net, with one furry eyebrow raised in commentary. Maya sent back a quick thanks and a more later, downloaded the notes to her tablet and bent her head to concentrate. It was a relief to disappear into other species' health problems for a little while, and as always, studying returned her to herself. If Maya was nothing else, she was a good student. 2 hours slipped by, almost without her noticing. Okay. Maya, there's something I need to talk to you about, Andali Sturyanyi said as they gathered up their things at the end of class. He'd bent down so he didn't loom quite as much as he naturally would, a habit he'd picked up long ago. White-gray fur marked with 3 black spots on his broad forehead, sharp fangs protruding slightly. It was funny to think that she'd once found those fangs frightening. Now they were both familiar and exciting. How boring the universe would be if it only had humans in it. We need to talk? That sounds serious, Maya said, smiling. She was finally comfortable enough to tease him after 3 years of friendship. She'd spent most of the first year of med school isolated, feeling little in common with the other humans, all city folk. If it hadn't been for her cousin Nwala, also stationed in the city, she would have been desperately lonely. And Nwala was busy enough at the police academy that Maya spent far too many hours studying alone. But then Andeli Sturyenye had reached out to her, asking for her help with the human reproductive system, which he just couldn't get his mind around. You're always in heat? Really? Her father had raised her to help people. Even if the people looked like giant furred monsters, she knew how Brian McCarthy would expect his daughter to behave. It had taken Maya 3 days to learn how to say Andeli Sturyenye's name properly, and she'd been intimidated by nearly 8 feet of muscle, fur, and quicksilver brains. Maya's short, slightly plump frame seemed even shorter by contrast. Yet somehow, over notes and classes and meals together, a friendship had formed. Sometimes Maya dreamed of that friendship evolving into something more. Soon school would be over and they'd be working long days together at their clinic. That first day, when Andeli Sturyenye had asked her about reproductive systems, maybe that had been his idea of flirting? She wasn't sure. But sometimes Maya woke on her mat of braided reeds from fevered dreams of fur and strong muscles, sweating under the thin cotton bedspread. What Maya's father would say if she brought an alien home to the Toluca, she didn't know. The last few years, he'd started talking wistfully of grandchildren. When Maya had parted ways with her boyfriend, Tommy was nice enough, but more interested in algae replication rates than in her. Her father had sulked for days. No grandchildren possible with Andeli Sturyenye unless they adopted. Not even the most cutting-edge genetic engineering had managed to create a human-Varisian hybrid yet. And her father was a little too proud of his McCarthy blood and heritage to be happy about adoption. Well, she likely wouldn't have to worry about what Brian McCarthy wanted for much longer. Maya pushed the sadness away, stuffed it down. She didn't want to think about that now. She blinked up at Andeli Sturyenye, dragging herself back to the moment. What had he been saying? Anticipatory grief had ambushed her. Too often these days she'd lose time. He'd wanted to talk. Andeli Sturyenye frowned, an unaccustomed expression for that usually cheerful face. It is serious, I'm afraid. Can I buy you a treat at the market? The market catering to off-world students was expensive, but Andeli Sturyenye received a generous stipend from his government to study on Kriti and didn't hesitate to share. Maya shook her head. I'd love that, but I've got a makeup genetics lab I need to take care of. And after that, I'm going to bike back to the Toluca instead of staying the week in the dorm. Your father's doing worse? Maya bit her lip, nodded slightly. I'm sorry. Sympathy in those great dark eyes. Maya glanced away. Too much sympathy, and she would start to cry. Can you walk me over to the lab? We can talk on the way. Maybe that would be better, he said, frowning. I don't actually have a lot of time. She slid her tablet into her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and reached out a hand. Andeli Storiene engulfed it in his, warm and furry and twice as big, claws curving carefully around her human fragile skin. Despite everything, a little thrill ran through her. How lucky she was to have him. Maya pulled herself to her feet, but then, deliberately, daring greatly, kept hold of his hand. Why not? They were almost graduated. They'd finally be doctors and business partners, and everything would change. Maybe it was time to see what else they might become. Maya's heart seemed to have jumped up into her throat. Improbable anatomy. But she could feel the pulse beating there, quick and hard. Let's go. Andeli Storiene walked beside Maya quietly for most of a block, his hand still curled around hers. She could feel the heat of him beside her in the humid midday air of the dome, and had to resist the urge to lean in, burying herself in that soft fur. Take this slow, Maya. No need to rush things. Lush city trees rustled in the breeze as they passed. The original colonizers had spared no expense on the university buildings, each one a separate work of art. White marble, black obsidian, shipped at horrifying expense from old Earth, the founders had been proud of their heritage, maybe a little too proud. If they'd spent a little less of their money on cold stone, maybe they could have built out a better medical network. There might have been a clinic in the Toluca already, and a school. Well, Maya and Andeli Storiene were going to take care of that. Then he said in a low tone, I'm leaving, tonight. What? Maya stopped still in the middle of the sidewalk, dropping his hand. Where could he go? There was only one city on Kriti, after all, Kaveri, home of the famed university. Kaveri and the two domed towns. Had he gotten a job in Shajanabad or Adur? I mean, they needed doctors too, of course, but she and Andeli Storiene had made plans that required his staying in the capital. And he was brilliant. Why would he exile himself to a backwater industrial town? His thick brows were jumping, a sure sign of agitation. Well, that and the lashing tail, that really gave it away. My cousin, you remember her, the programmer? Kim Srialini has a place on a jump ship, and they need a doctor. A jump ship? He was going off-planet? But you're not a doctor yet. Maya grasped for the piece of this that she understood. I can take my exams remotely. You know I'm going to pass. Yes, of course, but Andeli Storiene ran a quick pink tongue along those sharp, suddenly bared fangs. A nervous tick that he'd worked hard to get rid of that first year of med school. It scared the humans. It's just not safe for us here anymore. Us. Maya's throat tightened. He meant non-humans. The Warren attack was a year ago. There hasn't been another major incident. He frowned. Nothing major, no. But non-human-owned businesses have suffered property damage, homes have been defaced, there have even been a few beatings. You heard about what happened with that poor Herwith. Maya couldn't argue with that. The Herwith male had almost died. It had been trumpeted across the news. For a day, until more news of the conflicts that hadn't quite turned into all-out war took over the headlines. Across the charted worlds, the pure human factions spread their nasty rhetoric and nastier actions, but still, what could you do? This was life, wasn't it? You kept your head down, did your job, and hoped things would improve. Solvita is no better, or Eris, and you saw what happened on Ariel. Maya was speaking too fast, she knew, words tumbling over each other in her panic. This couldn't be happening. Andeli Storiene shook his head, the frown deepening on his face. I misled you, Maya. I'm sorry. I'm not just leaving Kriti, I'm leaving human space. We all are. What? He wasn't making any sense. Maya wrapped her arms around herself tightly. She was suddenly cold. He said soberly, the Varisian government has called us home. They're interdicting human space. They say it's just not safe. If we stay, we risk being cut off from our funds and worse, our families. They're barricading our wormholes. No human traffic in or out. Maya felt as if a pit had opened in her stomach. This was real. For how long? for the duration. Andale Storiane shrugged, a graceful ripple of fur. That's all they'll say. And I think that's my time. It's 2:20. So I'm pretty sure that's when I'm supposed to stop. NASFiC people, is that right? No word from the NASFiC people. Any final thoughts? I don't know that I have any final thoughts. There's a lot more. Hopefully my agent will like it. Uh, and yeah, and then hopefully a publisher will like it. So yes, she's like, when will the book be out? I don't know. First we have to see whether anyone will read it. We'll want to spend money on it. But in the meantime, I'll post this in the Discord, a link to my website, and you can read for free 5 or 6 other stories set in the universe. And then there is a novella for sale, which there's a lot of interrelated characters. So reading all of those before the novel comes out will give you a richer novel experience. So I'd recommend that. So thanks. Thanks so much, everyone. I will leave the voice chat now.